if you look on the top left, or top, I guess, right sheet of your paper, there's something written. And we originally had something using that, but now we can just ignore it. Okay, so now the new activity that we just thought of is we're going to go around the room. And have you guys ever played that game where each person just says one word, and then like as you guys continue, you guys are trying to make a story. So for example, I can say like the, and then Noah will say hiker, and then Vince will say something else to try to continue the story.
Heck yeah.
Okay, so we're going to try that starting on this side. Starting on Monday. So just say a word, and then it'll progress into a story.
The
Dog.
Exploded.
All. Around.
the
Kitchen.
and he
Bled.
Through. My.
Oh my god.
towel
And. I.
Cried.
Asleep.
Nice. Okay.
I'm asleep.
He kind of exploded.
So
We took it so literal.
Henry, you said that
But he could have exploded with happiness.
So, if you guys read the chapter in the book, it's about synergy. So maybe how did that exercise exemplify synergy or your understanding of synergy? Maybe just one or two responses for that.
we all listened to the previous words that other people said, so cooperating with that.
anyone else?
Similar to that, we all had to contribute to create one end goal.
Yeah. And so the book defines synergy as the means that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. The means that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Now the relationship between the parts determine whether or not the project falls apart or pulls forward and finishes the task at hand. The end product greatly outweighs the individual parts that make up the whole.
So the challenge of synergy is to apply the principles of creative cooperation, which we learn from nature, into our social interactions. That is also on your sheet. And if you need any repeating, we'll repeat after if that makes sense.
The essence of synergy is to value differences, to respect them, to build on strengths, and compensate for weaknesses. Yeah, okay, so synergy defined is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts.
The challenge of synergy is to apply the principles of creative cooperation, which we learn from nature, into our social interactions. Yeah, the challenge of synergy is to apply the principles of creative cooperation, which are learned from nature, into our social interactions.
And the essence of synergy is to value differences, to respect them, to build on strengths, and to compensate for weakness.
Does anyone need those repeated again? Last one.
So the essence of synergy is to value differences, to respect them, to build on strengths, and to compensate for weakness. And that kind of leads into our first point, synergistic communication. which is all about opening your mind and heart and expressions to new possibilities, alternatives, and options. Now, if we go back to when we learned about habit number 2, having the end goal in mind, hearing that synergistic communication is all about being open-minded and adaptable kind of seems to go against what Covey was preaching. Because when you have an end goal in mind, most people automatically assume there's one path to get to it. However, this isn't what Covey is preaching. Our group is comprised of individuals, and they will all bring different ideas to the big picture. Therefore, to listen to the ideas and adapt the means in which to reach the goal is what Covey means when we say to be flexible and adaptable. The goal still remains the same. However, the means to reach the goal may be manipulated and moved around. Synergy is almost as if a group collectively agrees to subordinate old scripts and write new ones, like Jesus did to the Pharisees.
Now we're going to be touching on synergy in the classroom, and you can go ahead and look at your sheet. There's another thing to fill out. Hopefully it's not too long this time. It's that synergy in the classroom tests whether teachers and students are really open to the principle of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. So it's synergy in the classroom tests whether teachers and students are really open to the principle of the whole being greater than the sum of its parts. So trust is a key component of synergy. Take, for example, when first starting a construction project, you can't just build a building over a piece of land or even on top of a building. You have to break it down and see the land for what it is. Then, without manipulating the land too much, you need to build around the hills and little obstructions in the way. And over time, once the foundation is set, the rest of the building will form. This is what trust looks like. Foundations need to be formed and created over time. Guards need to be taken down, and the teachers and students need to trust each other, whether it be trying to get by a semester or a class session. Furthermore, synergy is felt more powerfully when experienced rather than talked about. So producing something new is more meaningful than simply reading something old. So, despite all this, synergy is risky, and that's on your sheet. Synergy is risky. People who are hurt during the process of building synergy often will begin their next experience with the failure in mind. So, people who are hurt during the process of building synergy often will begin their next experience with the failure in mind. Does anyone need that repeated? Yeah. So people who are hurt during the process of building synergy often will begin their next experience with synergy, and the failure will be in their mind. So synergy cannot be forced, because you cannot force someone to trust you. It's like administrators who set up new rules and regulations based on the abuses of a few people inside of the organization. And that kind of limits the freedom and creative possibilities for the many people involved in that community. So the foundation of synergy is kickstarted through a combination of courage, authenticity, openness, and honesty. One more time. The foundation of synergy is kickstarted through a combination of courage, authenticity, openness, and honesty. Anyone need that one again?
Alright, this sounds all very idealized. Honesty and courage are both ideals that are not commonly found in the real world, including business settings. However, there are still ways to apply a synergistic method. For one, to address that in business, ideas equate to money, and that everyone thinks that their own idea is the best. Therefore, a lot of arguing occurs. However, now a new concept, empathy and creativity, come into play here. Take, for example, we're at a business meeting, and Brody and Enzo, they're spouting ideas rapid fire, trying to prove their own ideas better. I can either choose to ignore the efforts of both Brody and Enzo by saying that my own idea is best, or I can synergize and create a medium that allows all ideas to be heard. Sure, it will require a lot of work, a lot of creativity, and ultimately some ideas will need to be thrown out, But combining the ideas of Brody and Enzo and trying to understand what kind of effort they have put into those ideas allows teamwork and trust to flourish. Rather than trying to disagree with someone, hearing their side allows you to hear why another person thought an idea that you once thought was bad is good for them. When people are genuinely empathetic as well as courageous to speak out their own opinion, there is less mutually respectful talk or avoiding on stepping on eggshells that honestly doesn't go anywhere to synergistic communication. Once people experience real synergy, they're never quite the same. Knowing the possibility of having mind-expanding adventures in the future is enough fuel to try and pursue a synergistic environment.
We've talked a lot about trust affecting our communication, and this is how it applies. So if we can all recount back to the win-win and win-lose talk that we had last class, you will remember that the lower levels of communication entail low trust and low cooperation from both parties, and can be characterized by defensiveness, protectiveness, and often legalistic language, and this will therefore create only win-lose or lose-lose situations. So, respectful communication, and actually, does anyone need me to repeat that? The next fill out, levels of energy. This will therefore create only win-lose or lose-lose situations. Kind of reiterating last class's discussion. And then the next point there, respectful communication works in independent situations and even in interdependent situations. And one more time, respectful communication works in independent situations and even in interdependent situations. In independent situations, creativity takes hold, whereas in interdependent situations, compromise is the position usually taken. So compromise means that 1 + 1 = 1.5. Both a give and a take. The communication isn't defensive or protective or angry or manipulative. It is honest and genuine and respectful. However, the synergistic position of high trust produces solutions better than any originally proposed, including those of compromise. So, for example, thinking in a win-win way, or seeking first to understand allows for middle ground to be found. Take, for example, Coach Moore is trying to schedule an extra practice in ahead of the playoff game, but his players do not want to because they feel that the extra rigor will put unnecessary strain on their bodies. So instead of trying to argue and prove one side over another, Coach Moore decides to hire some athletic trainers to personally massage his players after the last game of the season, in exchange for a couple of extra practices. They are not opposite sides of the problem, but instead on the same side of the same coin. They are working together, trying to meet each other's needs and coming up with an alternative that benefits both sides, essentially making 1 + 1 = 6, 8, 16, instead of 1 + 1 = 1.5, as in compromise. And Henry and I were trying to, compromise sounds very similar to synergy, and we were trying to figure out a way to give you like a picture of maybe what it would be like. So we were talking last night, and we came up with just a rectangle here. And in the rectangle, you have two ideas. Let's say this is Henry's idea, and this is my idea. And we're kind of sharing that rectangle. Those two ideas are sharing, and kind of making compromises, saying yes to this, no to this, and you end up with a line between, the big task at hand. Whereas in something that has synergy, you have Henry's ideas and my ideas kind of like floating around all in that one task. We've created a new way to come at the task, rather than splitting it halfway down the middle, or skewing it a little towards my side, or something like that. So that's the best way we could come up with the difference between compromise and then synergy.
Now, Synergy, for the most part, is a positively connotated word, but there is such a thing as negative synergy. It occurs when people fail to recognize that despite coming to a middle term, there are differences that need to be addressed. So negative synergy occurs when people fail to recognize that despite coming to a middle term, there are still differences that need to be addressed. An analogy that helps and is used in the book is trying to drive down the road with one foot on the gas and the other foot on the brake. And it's trying to take the foot off the brake and give it more gas. When highly dependent people are trying to succeed in an interdependent reality, they will either grow too dependent on borrowing strengths from those with power, therefore going for a win-lose situation. They may talk the win-win, but really they don't want to listen, and instead they manipulate.
So to counter that type of manipulation, the synergistic system is inclusion of different ideas. It is not simply allowing time for an individual to convey their idea, but allowing the idea to impact and help form the way a task is completed, like with our box example. Allowing for others to have their ideas heard and integrated into that system is the way to promote a synergistic environment. And by valuing differing perceptions, you assure that the individual of their worth. So in conclusion, despite being in a group that is changing or has different ideas about how to go about a certain task, people within the group are willing to adapt and trust each other. And through this willingness to work with the other, despite their ideas maybe not being put into action, the group as a whole is able to complete a task together that one individual could not do alone.
Does anyone have any questions about synergy? Maybe that we can clarify.
Negative synergy.
Yeah, so negative synergy occurs when people fail to recognize that despite coming to a middle term, there are differences that need to be addressed. So when people fail to recognize that despite coming to a middle term, there are still differences that need to be addressed.
Could you elaborate more on the 1 + 1 = 1/2?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the idea behind that is there is a task, and the box represents the task that needs to be done. You, Crystal, has an idea, Cam, you also have an idea, and you're both trying to do the same task. But you decide to compromise and like cut it in half. Like we'll do half of your idea, half of my idea. So, you know, we'll split it down the line. There's Cam. Oh, sorry. Yeah. And here's Crystal.
It's okay.
Wonderful. So we end up having a little bit more of Crystal's idea being implemented into the task than Cam's. So it's still a give and take, but it's not something that you both came up with together, and that's what synergy is. This is like you're coming at the task together. You may not be cutting your ideas in half and kind of into an amalgamation and doing the task, but you're coming up with a new way of doing the task together instead of having your own separate ideas of how to do that.
Yeah, instead of like both parties making sacrifices and begrudgingly coming to like a middle ground that they both don't want to really do, that's compromise. Synergy is kind of both sides getting what they want.
No, I'll leave that out there.
Yeah.
You guys have examples of negative synergy?
Negative synergy. It's kind of like, so for example, using the example that we used of you. Like let's say you want to run that extra practice and your players didn't want to have that practice because they feel like they'll hurt their bodies or they'll be tired or whatever. And then you just say, I'll buy you like a drink or like a Gatorade or something. Like the players will be like, okay, like we're getting something, but it's not completely what they want. So they're not going to put in the full effort. There's still that like elephant in the room that needs to be addressed, but it isn't because you might think, oh, like we got the problem solved, and the players are thinking we got the problem solved, but then you guys are both frustrated at something. So that's